Hello everyone and welcome to British Murders, the podcast focusing exclusively on listener-suggested British murder cases. I'm your host Stuart Blues and this is the 10th and final episode of Season 12. Born on March 16th, 1989, Jamie Lavis had to overcome adversity from the very beginning. Whilst in utero, Jamie had a twin to keep him company, but sadly Karen, their mum, miscarried early on during her pregnancy, meaning Jamie would be welcomed to the world on his own. Despite what was reportedly a very tough pregnancy and a complicated delivery that almost led to Karen's death, Jamie was born and was as healthy as could be. Overcoming the odds was something Jamie would continue to do as he grew up, but for the time being, he had his loving family waiting for him back at their home on Buckley Street. In total, Jamie would have 4 siblings, 2 brothers called Scott and John Jr., and 2 sisters called Jane and Nicola, or Nikki. The children's dad was John Sr., as you may have surmised from me referring to one of his brothers as John Jr. Jamie was the family's special little guy. He just had something about him from the start that made him earn that extra bit of love from everyone in the family. The perception I got of Jamie through researching this case was that he was a playful and loving boy who most described as being a bit of a rascal. He was a lovable rogue who acted in a way that made him appear beyond his years. John McAllister was the head teacher at Clayton Brook Primary School during this story's events, and although Jamie's attendance was infrequent, John recalled how the youngster seemed to get on better with adults than kids. He was said to have been 8 going on 18, as he didn't quite fit into any particular peer group at the school. The reason for that we can only guess. Perhaps his lack of attendance hindered his ability to make long-lasting friendships. Or maybe he just wasn't a fan of the education system and would rather be out spending time with older children. Regardless of what life threw at Jamie, he always seemed to have a smile on his face and remained optimistic at all times. His impressionable nature can be explained in no better way than by me informing you that he liked to refer to himself as Park Drive, a nickname formed after Jamie was told a fabrication that he was found by his parents as a baby with a packet of cigarettes placed on top of him. Park Drive was the name of the cigarette brand rather than being a street or location, in case you're wondering why I mentioned the cigs. Jamie believed that story even after being told that it wasn't true by his mum and dad. Such was the level of trust and excitement he showed towards the things he was told by others. Karen has said that Jamie was a hyperactive child who never slept in past 4 in the morning. That was regardless of how late he went to bed the previous evening. He typically did this because it was during those early morning hours that delivery trucks did their rounds. Jamie would often follow such trucks and nick stuff like loaves of bread from the back when the driver went inside to make a delivery. He revelled in the bounties he acquired and often showed them off with pride to his friends and siblings. The early morning start soon became overwhelming for Karen, so much so that she was being driven to the point of desperation, whereby she'd arranged for Jamie to be seen by a specialist at a local hospital. Not only was Jamie incredibly active and mischievous for his age, he also smoked frequently, which was extremely concerning and needed to be stopped. The hospital visit was in aid of Karen reaching the end of her tether and seeking help after exhausting all previous methods. Jamie looked up to his older brothers, especially Scott and his mates, because they took him under their wing and taught him all manner of things to get by on the streets. They seem to have been the ones who taught Jamie about the early morning delivery runs and how to snatch items from the back of trucks. Jamie enjoyed music and movies like all kids, but the flicks he watched were not the usual PG movies you may have viewed at his age. He was a big fan of films that had graphic scenes of violence in them. To be fair, I think that's probably quite common for youngsters, especially boys. I recall being into similar types of movies as well as horrors when I was young. For his age though, he was noticeably small. He wore clothes made for kids 2 or 3 years younger than him, and standing at just 4 feet tall, he was a touch on the small side height-wise. With his blonde hair, which he kept shaved, brown eyes and grin which was exaggerated by 2 of his teeth missing at the front that had not come through yet, Jamie was an easily recognisable figure in the local community. Everyone knew him as the happy and cheeky lad he was, which, combined with what happened to him, makes this story that much more heartbreaking. Our main timeline begins on the weekend preceding the early May bank holiday, or May Day as it's also known. For the uninitiated, we get the first Monday of May off as a national holiday in the UK. May Day that year was the 5th, but our story starts the previous evening. After arriving home from a hard day's graft, John Sr. became increasingly frustrated at the fact Jamie had yet to return home, despite being told on several occasions not to stay out too late. It wasn't unlike the young lad to be home late and then, as I mentioned, be off again early in the morning, but sometimes he was out so late that it caused his parents great concern. When he finally got home that evening, Jamie was reprimanded by his dad and was informed that he was grounded. That might not have been the exact terminology used because grounded, to me at least, feels very much like a North American term, especially back in the 90s. Essentially, he was told that he must stay at home until further notice or until his parents lifted the ban, but Jamie being Jamie, he did the complete opposite. There's a bit of a crossroads here as to what exactly happened the next day, because some sources claim that Jamie sneaked out behind his parents' back in the early hours, directly going against their wishes. Other sources state he informed them he was heading to the nearby Quick Save, a supermarket, to offer his help to any elderly customer he could find. They would often allow him to assist with their shopping in exchange for a few pence or some sweets. Regardless of which version of events is correct, the point is that Jamie had left the house on May 5th and would never return. His mates he bumped into that day recalled him telling them he'd decided to run away from home on the back of being told off by his dad, which wasn't as out of the ordinary as it might sound. Jamie had gone missing as many as 3 times previously, but he would often return home pretty quickly. Karen said of her son that although he might put across a tough demeanour and act like he knew how to survive on the streets, he was a mummy's boy at heart and would certainly be too scared of the cold nights and darkness to sleep rough. Unless, of course, he was to be influenced by some much older boys. He could possibly do it then if he was being led, even if he didn't really want to. 2 days passed with no sign of Jamie, which caused his worried parents to inform the local constabulary. Several police officers would claim to have seen Jamie whilst patrolling the neighbourhood streets after he was reported as missing, but each time the youngster managed to escape their clutches by hopping over fences or slipping down alleyways. He knew those streets like the back of his hand, leaving the police with nothing more than a minimal chance of catching him on foot. Jamie had even earned the nickname the Artful Dodger, so named after the character in Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist. I'm unsure whether anyone referred to him as that or if it's just a nickname the papers came up with at the time due to his likeness to the character. Over the next couple of weeks, at least 30 different sightings of Jamie were reported, but it wasn't clear how many of them were reliable. A local hairdresser claimed she spotted him on May 7th as she drove home from work. She said she called out to him and he did actually walk over to her car, but when he recognised who it was, he scarpered. Given the volume of sightings, Karen and John were hopeful that Jamie was still alive and well, regardless of him being missing for so long. They felt he might fear coming home due to the telling off he'd no doubt get, but Karen was quoted in the papers as saying that that will not be the case. She appealed directly to Jamie for him to come home where he belongs. Further sightings placed Jamie in the company of 2 teenage boys, which led to fears that he was being led astray and was possibly shoplifting to survive. Other theories came from the police that Jamie was being given food by some of his mates who were taking items from their own home and delivering it to him. Karen then received a disturbing phone call on May 14th, during which the caller said absolutely nothing. The silence on the other end of the line must have been deafening, with the worried mother convinced it was her son's way of letting her know he was alright. A glimmer of hope came when some alleged security footage from a CCTV camera showed a young boy matching Jamie's description climbing over a fence at Bellevue Greyhound Stadium, just over a mile away from his home. That evidence was soon lost forever though, because the tape supposedly corrupted, leaving only something described as being a snow effect behind, which was no use to anyone. Various specialist search teams were brought in to help find Jamie. Mountain rescue teams searched areas of Clayton Vale, Debdale Park, Phillips Park and Phillips Park Cemetery, each of which was an area Jamie was known to frequent. The Northwest Regional Underwater Search Unit was then brought in to search the local waterways, including the nearby Ashton Canal. The Gorton and Audenshaw reservoirs were also trawled through. 90 selfless volunteers from the community also put themselves forward to help with the search. Their task was to check the railway lines, cemeteries, disused buildings, and parks. Everyone's best efforts unfortunately led to nothing until a breakthrough finally came on May 28th. A key witness came forward and explained that he had spent roughly 6 hours with Jamie on the bank holiday and could offer some testimony regarding where he was last seen. Local bus driver and family man Darren Vickers was the name of the witness, and it was on his bus, the 219, where Jamie spent most of that day. The 219's route runs from Manchester Piccadilly in the centre of the city, through Openshaw, up towards Ashton-under-Lyne, through Staley Bridge and on towards Glossop where it terminates. According to Vickers, Jamie queued to get on his bus at around 10:30 a.m. and presented him with a day saver ticket, meaning he had unlimited bus travel for that day. After a couple of hours on the bus, Vickers said he asked Jamie why he was still there, to which the lad replied he had nothing better to do. There was no school that day because it was a bank holiday. Again, this is all according to Vickers, who also claimed Jamie had some sweets and sausage rolls on his person that he'd stolen earlier that morning. The confident youngster was seen chatting with passengers throughout the day, with Vickers admitting that in hindsight he should have taken him back home instead of allowing him to remain on the bus for so long. He said he felt uneasy afterwards, hence him coming forward after seeing posters of the missing Jamie. Knowing the truth of what happened, it makes me feel sick saying all this, but it's important to tell the story in chronological order. It's also important to purvey just how much of a liar Vickers is. The search for Jamie had been extended by then to include wasteland areas near one of the local schools in nearby Gorton. In the aftermath of Vickers' testimony, new posters were put up around the community asking for anyone who rode the 219 bus that day to come forward. Just a day after learning about the bus ride, police did something drastic which is typically only reserved for murder inquiries. They decided to take blood samples from Karen and John whilst also taking away fingerprints from Jamie's bedroom. The plan for doing so was that if Jamie was found and, God forbid, he was no longer alive, the forensic teams would be able to confirm his identity via a familial DNA match. The combination of Karen and John's samples would allow them to logically estimate Jamie's DNA pattern. On the 1-month anniversary of his disappearance, Jamie's mum was starting to come around to the possibility that he was no longer alive. The odds of an 8-year-old surviving on his own on the streets for so long were slim to none, and of the more than 250 reported sightings of Jamie, only 3 were being treated as being possibly authentic, so said the detectives working the case. Here is where the story takes its first dark turn. Vickers, who lived with his common-law wife and their 4 children, 3 of whom were from a previous relationship she had, with the 4th being his, essentially moved in with Jamie's family. He spent every waking moment there, to the point where he gave up his job as a bus driver so he could spearhead the search for Jamie. He offered support, a shoulder to cry on, and comfort in a time of incredible need. One could only imagine how vulnerable Jamie's family were, especially his mum. If you look online at some of the photos of Vickers with Jamie's family, they're beyond creepy. In one, he can be seen sitting on a sofa with Karen, John and Jamie's 2 sisters, which might not sound overly bizarre, but what if I told you Vickers was sitting there with no shirt on? There's another similar photo in which he has his arms on the shoulders of Karen and John. Again, his shirt is off. The most haunting images are 2 in which Vickers can be seen holding a wallet-sized photo of Jamie posing in a school portrait in one of them, and in the other, he's holding a missing person poster with Jamie's picture on it. Even though Vickers' common-law wife was pregnant with their 2nd child, he remained as close as possible to Jamie's family, and even confided in Karen, explaining that his relationship was on the rocks. Karen and John offered their own bed as a kind gesture, given how supportive he'd been and how much he was helping them, all the while having no idea about the shocking nature of what he'd done and was doing to them. In one conversation with Karen, Vickers slipped up by telling her he'd given Jamie a lift after he'd finished his shift driving the bus and dropped him at Quicksave, close to his grandma's house. He reassured her that Jamie was alive and well when he did so, but it was a vital piece of information that he hadn't told the police. Vickers was arrested on the back of that and questioned about it, but was soon let go. The police thought they were onto something after seizing his car and finding some blood samples on the back seat, but DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to one of his kids. By mid-June, Vickers had been questioned on 2 separate occasions by detectives working the case, as his story about when exactly Jamie got on the bus didn't quite add up. CCTV footage from Ashton-under-Lyne bus station revealed Jamie didn't queue to get on the bus at all, and it wasn't at 10:30 that he boarded, it was closer to 11:30. Another thing Vickers had neglected to tell the police was that he'd spotted Jamie on his own that morning and approached him at the station at around 10:30. Within the hour, Jamie was on the bus. Had Vickers convinced him to do so? With insufficient evidence to charge Vickers with anything, their investigation continued, with the most common theory being that Jamie had been abducted and possibly murdered by someone, possibly a pedophile. After he was released the second time, Vickers spoke to the local papers to explain what had gone on. He said, "It wasn't me. I'm just trying to help. They asked me questions like, 'What have you done with Jamie? Is he alive? Have you done anything to him?'" Vickers then headed back to the bus station with John Jr., Jamie's 11-year-old brother, to ask people if they remembered seeing Jamie on the day he went missing. A couple of teenage lads supposedly ran away when Vickers approached them that day, as they felt something was off about the man. Meanwhile, Jamie's siblings refused to attend school until their special brother had returned home safely. They were becoming ill with worry and wanted the whole thing to be over and done with. Still suspicious about Vickers, the police secured a warrant to search his home, located just a few hundred yards from Jamie's house, and they reportedly ransacked the place. A furious Vickers said, "They ripped the place apart. I wish Jamie had never got on my bus. I came forward to help and became the suspect." Vickers' family insisted that he was just a big softy who wouldn't hurt a fly. The murmurs going around the neighbourhood were nothing more than vicious rumours, they said. Within a week of the warrant being acted upon, child actor Nathan Humphreys played the role of Jamie in a reenactment of his last known movements for Granada TV's Crime File, something I assume was similar to BBC's Crime Watch. The episode featuring Jamie's case aired on June 26th. A day removed from that episode came an anonymous tip from a man who claimed that Jamie's body had been buried in a shallow grave somewhere at Boggart Hole Clough, a large woodland park and beauty spot in Blackley, Greater Manchester. The park is located 3.5 miles north of Jamie's home. Various search teams were involved in scouring the 190-acre area, including over 100 police officers, 3 field cadaver dogs, a helicopter, and a 5-man underwater unit. The latter were tasked with searching the park's boating lake. Crews from the Bolton and Oldham Mountain Rescue teams also joined the search. Initially expected to last just 2 days, the search went on for a full week, and even saw the RAF lending the search team some body detection equipment which had previously been used in the Bosnian War a few years earlier. The equipment was used successfully in Bosnia to locate bodies months after they'd gone missing. When the search was called off on July 4th, the police were no closer to finding Jamie than they were when he was first reported missing. Now it's time for the story's second major dark turn. Merseyside-based Robert Jones, who pleaded guilty in 1996 to 8 counts of indecent assault against young boys, was released from Walton Prison, now known as HMP Liverpool, in January 1997. Jones had nothing to do with Jamie's disappearance, but he was questioned about it all the same in mid-July 1997. The reason for him being questioned was not just because of his previous offences, but also because he had a connection with Vickers. The two were close friends. After meeting while working as security guards at Wythenshawe Civic Centre in 1992, the two men soon realised they shared similar interests. Not only did they both run junior football teams, they also shared a disturbing interest in young boys. Jones indecently assaulted boys he'd recruited to his football school. That was his cover. I'll come to his similarities with Vickers in that regard later in the episode. Bringing it back to Jamie's story, Vickers was the person who collected Jones from prison when he was released, which goes to show just how good mates they were. It therefore made sense as to why Jones was questioned on the back of Jamie's disappearance. To make matters even more suspicious, Robert Jones Limited was the company Vickers used as a reference on his job application for Alexander Dennis buses. You may also appreciate knowing that he began working for the company just 5 days before Jamie boarded his bus that fateful May Day. By the beginning of August, the search had been extended once more, this time to a series of open expanses in the Reddish area of Stockport, Greater Manchester. The police were unable to use the helicopter in Reddish and therefore could not use the RAF's body detection equipment because it's in the Manchester Airport flight path. As with all previous searches, nothing came of it. New information continued to pour in from members of the public, but each time they went nowhere. By that point, Vickers had moved away from Openshaw, opting to travel 56 miles west to St Asaph Avenue in North Wales. The reason for Vickers' move seems to be due to him being attacked by someone with a machete, although it was later revealed to be a case of mistaken identity. The attacker thought it was someone else. He also likely made the move in an attempt to escape some impending charges brought against him earlier in the year for handling a stolen car. Vickers missed several appointments with the probation service after being handed a 12-month probation sentence, which included 100 hours of community service for the offence. He claimed via his solicitor to have had genuine medical reasons for missing said appointments, but he missed yet another appointment, this time at a magistrate's court in late August, which led to a warrant for his arrest being issued on the 29th of that month. All the while, in the background, detectives began compiling their case against him and some others who they believed to be co-conspirators. On September 23rd, a series of coordinated house raids were carried out by police, leading to 6 people being taken into custody. Amongst the arrested were Vickers' mum, sister and common-law wife. They all remained in custody for 3 days before being released after being questioned on suspicion of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Vickers was in custody at that point. He was handed a 12-week prison sentence in connection with the stolen car charge and missing all the appointments, serving 6 weeks of those before being released from Risley Prison in mid-October. He didn't spend long as a free man though. He was arrested for the 3rd time in connection with Jamie's disappearance on October 14th. This time, he was charged with child abduction, even though he continued to vehemently deny any wrongdoing. Just 10 days later, a discovery was made that would change the direction of the case completely. The partial remains of what appeared to be a young boy were recovered from an area of woodland close to Reddish Vale Golf Club. The boy's head had been removed from his torso, but close to the site, the forensic team also recovered a lower jawbone or mandible and a milk tooth. The clothes worn by the boy were identical to those Jamie was seen wearing in the bus station CCTV footage, but it would still take a few days before a formal identification could take place. The blood samples and DNA testing previously conducted were put to good use, and the body was finally confirmed as belonging to Jamie Lavis on November 24th, an exact month after it were found. Vickers was quickly charged with murder, with no application for bail being made. As he was led away from the dock after being advised of the new charge, Vickers reportedly said, "I didn't do it." 5 people were then arrested on November 26th and charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. It were basically 5 of the 6 people arrested previously: Vickers' mum, sister, common-law wife, his sister's boyfriend, and a family friend. Each of them would go on to have their charges dropped in the aftermath of the murder trial. Speaking of which, it looks like there were a few delays regarding the trial, because it was originally set to commence in November 1998, but was later pushed back to March 1999. Jamie's 9th birthday came and went on March 16th, 1998, at which point he was still not able to be laid to rest and hadn't had a funeral. His body was being kept at a mortuary while detectives continued their investigations. On June 19th, a private ceremony took place at a church in Openshaw with just Jamie's close friends and family attending. Karen read out a poem from a collection she'd started ever since her son went missing, with the speakers playing a couple of his favourite songs, including Mama by the Spice Girls and Truly Madly Deeply by Savage Garden. He was buried at Droylsden Cemetery, but disgustingly had his headstone and grave destroyed by vandals in January 1999. For some reason, known only to those responsible, Jamie's was the only grave targeted in the attack, during which crystal vases were smashed, toys and teddy bears left by relatives were damaged, flowers were pulled up, and a plaque inscribed with his name was thrown across the cemetery. An anonymous Stockport-based businessman then generously offered to pay for a new headstone. He said, "This type of senseless vandalism is unbelievable. Whoever did it has gone too far. I have children of my own, and when I read about someone damaging a child's grave, I felt I had to do something to help." When the trial finally commenced that March at Manchester Crown Court, it was Mr. Justice Forbes who oversaw the proceedings. This, I guess, is where the story takes its third and final major dark turn. Prosecutor Brian Levison opened the trial by claiming that Vickers had befriended, groomed and seduced Jamie before taking him to an unknown location in a car once his shift finished and murdering him. The jury of 9 women and 3 men were informed that Jamie was allowed by Vickers to change gears while the bus was in motion, dish out tickets to passengers, open the bus doors, count cash, and climb all over the luggage racks. Testimony from Derek Robinson, a prisoner serving 10 years for sex-related crimes who shared a cell with Vickers, provided some of the most damning evidence. Vickers had allegedly told Robinson that Jamie's skull was missing, something only the police knew at that time as it had not been made public knowledge. He also confessed to having killed Jamie and was convinced to write down a confession, which he duly did. It was 15 pages long. In it, he professed his regret at what had happened, but insisted it was an accidental death caused by Vickers breaking hard and Jamie cracking his head open after falling on the bus. Comments regarding having struck Jamie on the head just before the supposed accident were also written down. He then retracted that confession. The defense team went down the route of using Jamie's parents as scapegoats in an attempt to prove their client's innocence. Karen was stated as having had an affair with Vickers, which she denied, and John Sr. was also put in the frame when he was accused of being the person responsible for murdering Jamie. John denied the accusation. Referring back to Robinson's conversation with Vickers, it was also alleged that he said he'd sexually abused Jamie on the bus before killing him and dumping his body in the empty house next to his whilst he figured out what to do. Vickers then said he had a family meeting, the purpose of which was to decide what to do next. The decision was made to get rid of Jamie's body. Again, this is all coming from Robinson, and you must remember that all those 5 people arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice would go on to be released without a charge in November 1999. Robert Jones also testified, explaining that he was told by Vickers that he'd killed Jamie. After a month and a half, the judge summarised before sending the jury out to deliberate. They returned to the court with their verdict on April 23rd, finding Vickers unanimously guilty of murdering Jamie. Karen said afterwards, "Justice has been done today for Jamie. Hopefully now he can rest in peace. No child deserves to die how Jamie died. Hopefully now Vickers is in prison, children in Manchester can sleep safer." Vickers' disgusting past was soon revealed after he was found guilty. It came to light that he was a prolific pedophile who, like his mate Jones, abused young boys under the guise of being their football coach in the early 90s. His face was recognised by some of the children's parents. The kids will have been between the ages of 9 and 11 when they were subjected to Vickers' advances. Some of the papers went into detail about what exactly Vickers did to those poor boys, but I won't be doing that here. As he was sentenced to life in prison on May 13th, some sources claim he was later handed a 25-year minimum. I don't think minimum terms were a thing back then. Vickers finally admitted to what he'd done, kind of. Basically, he had confessed to killing Jamie while he was locked up in Strangeways, aka HMP Manchester, but he said he had no idea it were being taped and would be used in court against him. He said of it, "I just thought I was there," meaning at court, "for a recommendation. I've been stitched up by somebody. I don't know who, but there was no evidence against me. I've never done anything like that in my life. I've got my suspicions about who did it, but that's all I'll say. I told the truth in court and nothing else." A week passed before he decided to retract that latest confession and said he would be appealing his life sentence. Karen and John then got $5,000 each from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority, roughly $9,000 each today, before a new headstone was finally provided for Jamie in July 1999. In the years between then and now, I was saddened to hear that both John Sr. and Jr. have passed away. John Jr. died on January 24, 2017, with his dad passing 3 years later on August 17, 2020. I end this especially difficult to hear episode with a smidge of light in an otherwise wholly dark story. Vickers became eligible to be considered for parole in October 2022, and his case was referred to the parole board by the Secretary of State for Justice, as is the law in the UK. Taking place on February 14, 2023, the outcome of the review was as follows. After considering the circumstances of his offending, the progress made while in custody, and the evidence presented in the dossier, the panel was not satisfied that Mr. Vickers was suitable for release. Nor did the panel recommend to the Secretary of State that he should be transferred to an open prison. And that was the story of the murder of Jamie Lavis. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on it. It certainly wasn't an easy one to research, so I can only imagine what it was like to hear. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Stuart Blues. This has been British Murders. Until next time, cheerio.